Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. As part of our Mind-Body Connection series, we'll continue to look more deeply at the three columns and their corresponding action steps. Today, I explore how you can take the action step of reducing judgment of yourself and what you want to increase the strength of your power column. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and I'll get back to you personally. And finally, you can reserve your place in any one of my seminars or purchase any of my PDFs at www.crushingdoubt.org. So many of us are especially judgmental of ourselves, even if we're much kinder to others in our assessments. And as I often say, if you could just stop doing what you're doing that is upsetting you, you would. But that doesn't mean it's actually so hard to do at the same time. So not to sound like a broken record, but the way to stop anything is through understanding what is happening. So let's take a deeper look into what is happening when you get judgmental with yourself, how to stop it, and how it applies to the power column, because I assure you it does. Let's first talk about where self-judgment comes from. Self-judgment comes from a number of sources. The number one won't surprise you if you know anything about psychology. Parents who judged us harshly make us question whether we are valid, lovable, good, make sense, all of the things that we need to feel a sense of integration and good feeling about ourselves carrying forward. We are impacted greatly by our parents. Parents who neglected us or were distracted also can create this message. So it can often be a kind of less obvious trauma. And if you don't want to use that word, that's totally fine. But it can be subtle. But how our parents are impact whether we feel good about ourselves. So here's the thing. It is essentially a certain piece of loyalty to such parents to continue being critical of ourselves. We're carrying on something that they handed to us, and it's almost as if we're interpreting it as that's the way we're supposed to be living with ourselves. That's one source of self-judgment. In addition, we protect ourselves from further disappointment from such parents by beating them to the punch. The problem is it doesn't actually do anything real to protect us and just makes us miserable. But that's the cycle that we get into with parents who were critical. And a lot of times, even the best parents had pockets of the way that they raised us or the way that they interacted with us where they were critical. Maybe it was just they were grumpy, they were working so much, or they had pressures. But if it didn't come out in an ideal way, it can lead to self-judgment. Here's another place that self-judgment can come from, though, because I don't want people thinking it just comes from parenting. It can also come from self-consciousness. So this is a different sort of self-criticism because it doesn't come from parental interactions or even necessarily experience. In fact, if you have parents who are self-conscious themselves, it tends to lead to you being self-conscious yourself, just because that's the model that you have. So it's not necessarily always about bad things happening in the family, although self-consciousness is not particularly fun to be around, I have to say. Self-consciousness needs to be thought of as a form of self-criticism if it is to be stopped. Here's the thing. You should be allowed to exist without someone, even you, monitoring your every move. The reason you have that monitoring is that you are being self-critical. That is a form of self-criticism. So self-consciousness is a form of feeling that you aren't good enough to just be who you are. It's almost like you feel like you have to watch out very carefully for how you're being. Self-judgment can also come from low self-esteem, and not just in relation to parenting or self-consciousness, because those will both give you low self-esteem or forms of low self-esteem, but it can also relate to not mastering something in your life. So if you come up against a certain developmental need and you're not getting past it, when people stall out in their development in any way, they're left feeling incompetent, not good. And it leads to bad feelings about the self. And what do we do with those bad feelings? We typically bash ourselves with it over and over. That's self-criticism. That's self-judgment. We don't typically have a lot of empathy for ourselves about struggles to develop because we don't understand it well enough. And that's part of my goal, is to explain it well enough so that you can stop being critical of yourself and just recognize development is not always easy, especially when it runs into issues that align with problems you've had in the past. Another part of the problem is that this kind of self-judgment, which can come from not advancing in certain categories of life, can lead to comparison with others. And it can also lead to the mistaken notion that the other people are somehow better than us for not having the problem. Here is the main problem we run into. Not being able to master something usually comes from the unconscious. So we don't know about it. I often have to say this again because the unconscious is not a very well-known concept in terms of what it actually means. You truly are not aware of it. That's what it means to have something be unconscious. So how do we master something we don't know about? How can we master these conflicts that are going on inside us that we don't know about? And the interesting thing is, how are we to blame for it? Interestingly, we both don't know about it and blame ourselves for it. And I will remind you why. I did a video on the unconscious and how it works, and the fact is the unconscious always knows everything that's going on. So it knows all of these things, and you're blaming yourself for unconscious reasons. That's what's driving a lot of the self-judgment. The good news is we can solve this in a conscious way if we recognize how to solve the problem of blame. So this problem of the unconscious really leaves us with a question about who to blame. Unconsciously, you're blaming yourself, but consciously, you might feel quite confused about it. Now, if you ask me, if you break it all down, in the end, the buck stops with the parents. And I'm sorry to say that, but I am a parent, so I feel a little more qualified to say that. Even the ones that try their hardest and even do a really good job, if the kid didn't get what they needed, it's often going to lead to self-judgment. And we need to help our kids with that. We need to talk to them about, no, listen, I was grumpy not because there's something wrong with you. I was grumpy because of something going on with me. That's a good thing to say as a parent, that kind of thing. The stream of psychology flows downward, and every generation has a chance to wake up and recognize what parts they're not doing well and why, in order to stop multi-generational trauma or even just passing on certain unnecessary struggles. When it comes down to it, one of my favorite lines I always say is that just because you are the solution doesn't mean you are the cause of the problem. You are not the cause of your self-judgment, but you are the solution, and that is good news. In addition to all the things I said about what causes self-judgment, it also can just become a habit. At a certain point, you may just not even know you could be living a different way. It's just how you operate. And when this isn't called into question at all, your habit is allowed to be seen as a permanent part of your personality with nothing you can do about it. As always, I encourage people, question what is going on. If you question what is going on, you have a chance to do things differently, especially about things you didn't think could be different. Self-judgment, though, does also have one other key source that I absolutely need to note, and that is the condemnation or fear of power. So here's where we get to the power column part of this. Think of self-judgment in terms of a lack of power in relation to the self or others. We're bringing ourselves down a peg every time we criticize ourselves. So when we need to feel out of power with ourselves or, are mad at ourselves for something or for whatever internal reason, it isn't hard to find a narrative that does the trick. In fact, interactions with other people can often serve very powerfully in this regard. So we watch to see what strengths do other people have or what weaknesses they don't have that we do have. And we use that as a battering ram against us. Social media is a great example of this. We look on social media and imagine all kinds of things that take away our own power. We look on Facebook or Instagram and say, look how good they have it going. Oh, I'm not doing that. Oh, I never thought of that. It happened a lot during the pandemic as people were scheduling things and some people were not. We weren't scheduling a lot of things. We looked at other people and thought, oh my God, look how well they're doing. The other problem with social media is there's plenty of aggression going around in other people that, many are all too happy to establish their power over us or diminish our power, especially if we're threatening. So there's a lot of interpersonal power dynamics going on, and self-criticism is a way that this plays out. So keep in mind, there are many sources at play that can create self-attacks, and people desiring their own power or fearing it plays perhaps the most major role of all. The good news is, if we understand self-criticism, judgment, and self-attacks through the lens of power, we suddenly have the key to reinterpret what we can do about it. This is one of the things I love about my system and the different columns. They offer different information. Things are often hard to solve, not because they're inherently so hard to solve, that's how it can feel, but because we don't understand them. So solving the riddle of judgment is actually very simple, even if it isn't easy. Another one of my phrases that I say a lot of the time. Our job to solve self-criticism and self-judgment is simply to be powerful. If we stay on a powerful path, we start to see that judgment is artificially induced by expectations, norms, comparisons, and much more of these things that we just don't need. So judgment is a form of imprisonment that is generated by our misunderstanding what kind of power is available to us. We often don't think we can do things differently. If we start to call that into question, we have a chance to do things very differently. The truth is we have many, many more options available to us than we have been taught or tend to believe. And that's what we need to start thinking about in the power column. Consider how many options you might have about things you never thought you would have options for. All right. Now, how do you stop your own judgment of yourself? Let's say you come to an awareness of this, you understand it, and you're getting ready to work in your power column. How do you stop feeling bad about yourself over such things as being late, not having a gift for a party, or believing something different than other people, or raising your kids differently, or not being loyal to your family at times, or having a different value than your significant other, for example? All of these little things are ways that we can get very judgmental of ourselves, or sometimes of other people in defense of ourselves. But that's all because of self-criticism, even when we're criticizing other people. So again, may not be easy, but it's actually simple. Call into question your assumption that you have to think about it the way you are thinking about it. You don't. That's just the way you have been thinking about it. The reality is our self-judgments are prisons of our own making. Here's some examples. You do not have to keep being the way that you were. You do not have to keep being the person other people expect you to be. You do not have to hide parts of yourself that you've been hiding. You do not need anyone else to validate what you think, believe, enjoy, or love. That's a great one to get free of. Just stop thinking that you've got to prove it to them or that they're even in the mix. The most powerful thing you can do is to recognize you get to decide. You do not need anyone else to understand who you choose to be with. You don't need society to agree with you on how you raise your kids, barring conflicts of, safety, health, and mental health of the kids. And you also can recognize that society is dead wrong about many things all the time. So why are we even thinking about what they think? They're wrong about many, many things. Mind-body experience is a great example of it. Would we be having this mind-body discussion so often if they were right about things all the time? Just look at how often they are wrong. And then you can consider maybe my way, even though it's different than everybody else, is actually the right way, or the best way, or at least the best way for me and my family. It's okay to realize that you may actually know better than everyone around you or even society at large. So here's what you do to end self-judgment. Again, simple, not necessarily easy, but at least you can hold fast to these ideas. Follow what is in your heart. What makes you feel good about yourself? And what helps the people around you? Those two things together. What feels good to you and what's helping other people. Don't let preconceived notions sway you from what you know. There's a lot of preconceived notions out there that are not worth following. Assert your power over society and everyone else, including your family, when you disagree with them, especially about things that are important to you. This is why the power column is often your key to action steps. If you free yourself up from thought processes that don't make any sense, then you have a chance to think differently. Here's a good example. A lot of people, for whatever reason, they worry about different things related to gender, like worrying that your daughter's overweight. This is just a societal construct. It doesn't actually matter at all. There's nothing going on there whatsoever. I mean, you can argue about health if somebody's very overweight, but the fact is, it's still just a societal construct. You don't have to be a slave to it. So recognize that she's perfect just the way she is. Or that your son doesn't have to be so manly all the time. Why? Who says? Recognize that human beings are extremely arbitrary in what they think and why. We're acting like it's just a foregone conclusion, all these things. But they're not. It's very arbitrary, and it takes great strength to think for yourself. But this is what is needed always, especially in the power column. Think for yourself. Don't let others sway you. Start there, and it gets easier. In the end, we're all just conscious beings floating on a rock in space. But we think that what the collective has decided is what should be. Well, the collective was wrong about things for millennia, over and over and over. And usually, in my experience, every well-lived life involves choosing your own path and not being dominated by these arbitrary views. So call it all into question before you sign on to things. If you end up agreeing with what you already knew, great, that's fine. If you don't, use this as your rule of thumb. If it isn't destructive to yourself or someone else, it's fine. Whatever it is that you want and whatever it is that you think. You do not need any other guiding principle, and as such, you can be free of so many of the things you feel locked into by recognizing that they don't make as much sense as you thought they did. They're just choices and not necessarily the right ones. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and I'll get back to you personally.